With all the WordPress drama, open source has arguably never faced more scrutiny. If you don't think seriously about how to align your project, you're going to piss a lot of people off and you might even get forked. Today's guest, John O'Nolan, has torn up the playbook and found a model that is arguably the perfect aligned model while doing more than $7 million ARR.
This constant battle between Automattic, the venture-backed company that were trying to make billions of dollars, and the open source project. There just seems to be endless conflict between priorities of both. And I don't know if you've seen the last few weeks, but those conflicts have come up again. 10 years ago, you'd say that kind of stuff and people would be like, Medium would never do anything bad because it would kill their business. Whereas now, there's been enough cycles that people are like, oh, I've seen this movie before. I see where this is going. Okay, you might have a point. And that's nice.
Scaling DevTools is on Ghost, and we've used it for like the whole time that we've existed. So I think 2 or 3 years. And I don't even remember. I was trying to think about why we chose Ghost, and I think it was because in the kind of indie hacker community, it kind of became like the default choice where everyone was hosting on Ghost, and people were just like, use Ghost. And so I have that perspective on. And by the way, I've been very happy with it. It's great.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. But I kind of wanted to hear about like why you think people, like how you've been growing basically.
Yeah. So we started out as just a blogging platform. Obviously, that was literally the tagline. And we evolved to try and serve the needs of people who are blogging professionally, people who are publishing on the internet professionally. And probably the biggest inflection point that fueled most of our growth for the past few years was when we added email newsletters and memberships, along with paid subscriptions. As soon as we did that, which was, we built it before Substack existed, but then Substack came along and made that very popular. And as soon as those two things sort of happened in unison, the creator economy suddenly popped out of nowhere as a term, right? And that drove an enormous amount of growth through COVID. Turns out a lot of people who were in lockdown were starting blogs and newsletters and membership sites. So that was our first kind of proper hockey stick. And we're still kind of riding that wave to some extent. I think the creator economy sort of had its big spiky trend, and now it's calmed down, but there's still a lot of growth there.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in, because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API, and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel, as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Nock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks, WorkOS, for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show. I know that one of the reasons that Ghost resonates with developers is open source. The fact that Ghost is open source. And how does that, do you try to communicate that with journalists as well?
Yes. It's a difficult one to market because you sort of get this two-sided feedback of, I don't know what open source is and I don't care and it's too technical, and now I think Ghost is technical, I don't want to hear about it. And on the other hand, when people philosophically understand the purpose of open source, like forget about the code. The open source piece of it means that no one can ever take it away from you, which is what happens again and again on the other platforms they're used to, right? Medium suddenly redesigns or puts on a paywall that you didn't ask for, or completely pivots to a new direction and the algorithm changes and no one sees your content anymore. That doesn't happen with open source because you fundamentally control your destiny. And if you don't like what we do, what Ghost does, you just take the code, move it to a new server, and do whatever you want with it. And when publishers understand the independence angle of open source and the significance of it to their business, and then they're not going to be rug pulled again like they have been with so many other platforms, then it starts to resonate. But it's a challenge to get them there. Open source is inherently kind of a technical phrase, and explaining it is tricky. we're always kind of trying to figure out better ways to tell that story. Because when people get it, it resonates. They click and they go, "Oh, this is amazing! Like, why haven't I heard about this before?" But up until that point, it's challenging to get them to fully buy into the idea.
Yeah. How have you been able to kind of like pitch it? Like, I guess is
So we don't tend to use the word open source much in our marketing anymore. It's funny, we get shit sometimes on Twitter or elsewhere as being like fake open source because we don't have giant GitHub links on the homepage.
really.
There is a GitHub link, but it's not big enough apparently, and we don't. And there's not a big download button on the homepage, for example. So your open source cranky purists say like, "Oh, you're not open source enough. You're just using open source as marketing," which is not the case. The case is our target audience wants to hear about how Ghost is independent and how it's different from the other platforms that they've heard about. So we use those words. We use independence. We talk about being a nonprofit organization and what that means, which is very related to being open source, because that's what they're interested in. Then there's a giant developers section, which is full of docs and install guides and GitHub links and everything. It's just it's one level deep in the navigation. It's still right there. But we try and shape the message depending on who's reading it, right? And for the most part, people landing on the homepage are not developers, and they're not trying to find the information about developer topics, but it's still readily available. But yeah, trying to change it depending on who's reading is kind of the main thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're kind of focusing on, we're independent. You have control. You could always walk away from Ghost and still use Ghost in a sense of like.
Yeah, which is also an interesting one because that message doesn't typically resonate unless someone has been burned before. If someone's setting up their first ever publication on the internet and you say, "Look, you could leave Ghost at any time you want," like, yeah, and what? I don't understand. What's the value of that?
Everything else,
because
right?
unless you have like a lived experience of being locked into a platform or a network, or like having the algorithm changed and feeling very stuck and having all this sunk cost fallacy about the amount of time you've invested, then you might hear the cure, but you don't know what the disease is that it's curing, So it's all kinds of layers. But what's nice, what's useful in 2024 is a lot of people have much more of a sense of those things. 10 years ago, you'd say that kind of stuff and people would be like, Medium would never do anything bad because it would kill their business. Whereas now, there's been enough cycles that people are like, "Oh, I've seen this movie before. I see where this is going. Okay, you might have a point." And that's nice.
Yeah, it's I think everyone's seen it. I heard you describe like Quora as like a plague on the internet or something along those lines.
Place where happiness goes to die, I think.
It.
Yeah.
A place where happiness goes to die. And it's true. It's like, it is. You've seen a lot of those things, and like Medium now is like very aggressive paywall. And I can totally see how people resonate with that.
Yeah.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is like something that a lot of dev tools think a lot about and struggle with is, how open source should you be? How are you still going to make money? I think that your approach is that you are basically very, very open source, and someone has no obligation. They can go host it themselves. And yet people like me still pay. So yeah, what is your take on that, and how has your approach been?
Yeah, so our model is the whole product is open source, and then we have a hosting platform which is paid. As you said, you don't have to use it. You could host your site anywhere, but we've done our very best as the people who make Ghost to make our hosting platform the kind of the easiest way to run it. So if you don't want to, figure out all the node installation steps or do the updates, and we do release updates kind of weekly or every 2 weeks. It's kind of the slowest pace of updates that we would release. Then you can use our hosting. It all happens in the background, all happens automatically. All the kind of third-party services you need to do things like email and payments and image editing and other libraries we integrate with are all pre-configured. So there's a convenience factor that is kind of what we're selling alongside the hosting. If you can do that model, I think it's a great model. It's worked really well for us. Building hosting infrastructure is not easy, but it does have decent margins, and it does have very consistent, sustainable revenue. We've never had any enormous spikes or any enormous dips in our revenue growth. It's just been very stable. And having that consistent monthly revenue, kind of knowing how much we made this month, knowing how much we made next month, makes it very easy to hire people because you always know what your budget is, which is not the case if you're selling one-off licenses or products. You might have a really great January and a really bad February, and that makes it quite difficult to wrestle with the idea of, should I hire someone or should I not? I don't know if I'm going to have a good month or a bad month. So I think for anyone who is doing open source where there could be a hosted or a cloud version of it, I think it's a great model. Of course, not everyone can do that. If you're making a search library or something, there might not be a cloud version of it that is conceivable with that model. So I totally know that it's not available to everyone. But if there's an angle, I think it's a pretty good model you can do.
Yeah. And so it makes total sense. With, like, for instance, me, I think I'm paying like $9 a month, which is, or 11. It's a very good deal anyway. And there's just no, the equation is just not even worth looking into of like how much time it would take for me to manage it versus like the value that I get. But I would imagine that once you start getting up to like, if you're pitching to like, well, I don't know if you have like sales process and stuff, but like if you're talking to like a Coca-Cola or someone and their monthly bill is probably like quite a lot more, and like they are very comfortable maybe self-hosting or something like that, like does the equation change with the bigger companies?
It actually doesn't, because the big companies very often, the idea of them having their very expensive team, expensive in terms of salary, spend a lot of time solving this problem versus paying us and having their team be completely free is pretty much 100% of the time we work out cheaper. The other thing that's interesting is you might imagine that self-hosting would be cheaper, but it often isn't. If you are setting up equivalent infrastructure to what Ghost Pro, which is our cloud service, has, it starts out cheap, right? You get let's say a $10 droplet. Cool. You're going to be cheaper than us. No problem. Okay. But now if you want email newsletters, you need to go and sign up for Mailgun. And because we send hundreds of millions of emails, we have really good volume discount pricing with Mailgun. So we pass on that pricing to customers as much as we can. But you don't get that if you're signing up from scratch. You get your low volume, therefore the price is higher. And you have to manage all of that. And the thing about managing, the website has to stay online, so now someone's on call. That's a salary. The emails have to get delivered, and if the deliverability goes down, someone needs to investigate it. That's a salary.
Yeah.
Now you get hacked or you get a DDoS. Okay, so now you need like a CDN and a firewall. So we have Fastly in front of Ghost Pro, and again, volume discounts, so we can get that for everyone. But if you do that by yourself, it's going to be very expensive to get all that set up and pretty complex. So it's probably another salary. So I'm certainly not saying everyone needs all of these things, but if you do, as a larger organization, and you start adding them up, the costs just of running an app of the complexity of Ghost, because it's easy to see it as just a simple little blogging thing. But once you start adding in all the authentication of members and the email notifications and the email newsletters, which is bulk, not transactional, and the payments and the webhooks from Stripe that are flying back and forth, and queues for managing scheduling, it quickly turns out to be quite a substantial piece of technical architecture. And one of the challenges I think we're going to have over the next few years is we actually don't want to have everyone using Ghost Pro. We don't want to be hosting all of the Ghost sites, because I don't want to grow a giant company. We have this idea of not having about more than 50 people working at Ghost. So there could come a point where we have too many customers. We are not going to hire more people to be able to deal with that many customers. So we actually have to figure out making self-hosting easier and cheaper so that we can offload some of the market demand to other companies and have them succeed and have them do well with Ghost. So we've got a big incentive to try and address this in future. But at the moment, the convenience factor of Pro is so high that a lot of people people who are running kind of the serious sites that are using a lot of the features, they will just use Pro because it works out better value. Now, if you're a developer, you just want a blog on the internet, you don't want any of those extra things, you can self-host, and you don't mind spending a few hours a month. You can self-host. It will be cheaper. You'll have an absolutely fine time. There is no difference between Ghost Pro and the self-hosted option. It's the same code base on both. So we don't have like special features that are only available to our customers. It's just a case of how streamlined, how automated, how many external things you have to depend on or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's like actually the first time ever that we've heard on the show. There'll come a point where we have too many customers and we don't want to grow anymore.
Yeah.
And I think you're pretty unconventional in many ways. And
I've heard that.
It's a good thing. It's very cool. So could you talk a bit about like the structure? Because Ghost is a non-profit, and also you publish your revenue. So I can see that it's like your monthly run rate is like $600,000 or something like that right now.
Yeah. Indie Hackers butchers the numbers a little bit, I think, if you're pulling it from there, but it's around that ballpark. So when I had contributed to WordPress before Ghost, and one of the great frustrations I had was this constant battle between Automattic, the venture-backed company that was trying to make billions of dollars, and the open source project, which was supposedly democratizing publishing and was volunteer-based. And there just seemed to be endless conflict between the priorities of both. And I don't know if you've seen the last few weeks, but those conflicts have come up again. And so when setting up Ghost, I really wanted to have a business that could support the open source project, not be in conflict with it. And so the idea I came up with was a nonprofit organization that could make money from hosting to sustain its operations, but that would be fundamentally independent. So I don't own Ghost. My co-founder Hannah doesn't own Ghost. We're just trustees, which means we can control, steer the ship, decide what Ghost does. But all of the revenue that Ghost earns is reinvested into the project. It's reinvested in the form of salaries paid to the team, but and funding our operations. But if Ghost makes a profit in any given year, that profit stays within the company. It stays dedicated to the mission. It's not going out to investors, shareholders, anyone else like that. Non-profit's a confusing term. People think it means no money, but it actually means no money for the owners, because there are no owners. There are no owners. So it's not for profit. It's being built for something else, not for profit motives. And there's not many non-profit tech companies out there. In fact, I'm not sure I can name any others that have quite exactly our model. There's kind of non-profit foundations that do open source, but they don't necessarily have a commercial business that funds it. It's more donation based. But it's worked remarkably well for us. And one of the best things about it is we just have this very clean model of like, hey, if you use our hosting, you're contributing to the project. Thank you. You're funding us making new features for you. And when we do things or announce things, whether they are positive or negative, it brings a lot of goodwill. People trust that if we're making a decision, the motivations are to do it for the good of the community, the good of the user base, the good of the project, not because it's going to make me on the side very wealthy, which often is the case with traditional startups, right? They all want to change the world until Google comes along and offers them $1 billion, and then suddenly, you're a Google branded product that's going to be shut down in a year. And then where did the world-changing ambition go? Okay, yeah, that was the marketing side quest. The real ambition was to sell. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not what I want to do. I want to build something that lasts. I want to build something that's shared infrastructure, that's good for the internet, that's good for publishing, good for journalism. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it's so you're not thinking of doing the OpenAI flip at some point, or?
No, I think it would be much more challenging for us. There's interesting nuances between nonprofit structures in the US versus elsewhere. And I'm not a lawyer nor an expert on legal structures, but I know a little bit. And from what I can tell, US structures are a little bit more malleable in terms of being able to flip them in the way that OpenAI has. we have a UK structure. We're in Singapore, but it's British common law, and those are a little more strict about what things they do and don't allow. And I think it would be a lot harder.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned the automatic stuff, and I know that before Ghost, you were, I think, deputy head of design at the
Yeah,
WordPress org, right? Not
yeah,
automatic,
correct.
but yeah. I would imagine that you have some sort of opinions on what's going on. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts on what's going on there?
It's not a surprise to me. Like a lot of the motivations of creating Ghost and choosing the structure we've chosen, licensed, nonprofit, um, was because of this kind of two-sided conflict between um, Automatic and WordPress and all the trademark and ownership and like all these things. Like that existed 12 years ago when Go started. And having been on the core team and seen that from the inside, I was endlessly frustrated by it. I would see the way the products would get developed, and it wasn't always based on, what appeared to be best for users. Sometimes it was based on whoever Automatic was trying to compete with. And sometimes that would be Tumblr, and then post formats would get added, and sometimes it would be Squarespace. Now I've got Gutenberg, and sometimes it would be Shopify, and then they'd acquire WooCommerce, and things that would support WooCommerce would get prioritized. Some of those were after my time, for the record, but there were others that were during my time, and it just didn't. I didn't love it, and I think the recent conflict is the same thing. It's just more people are aware of it now, or more people are becoming aware of it now. It's not my favorite. I think open source projects need more transparency and more integrity, particularly if they're going to be volunteer based and contributor based. And I think what we're seeing is capitalism meets community, capitalism meets open source development coming to a real head there. I really don't know how it's going to end. It's been like watching a bad movie the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's a little dramatic. Yeah, it's one of the things that like kind of this is obviously like an example where it seems like the community is maybe frustrated with some of the incentives.
Yeah.
If someone's raising venture capital and they're building an open source project, do you have any advice that you would say to them around like being able to keep the integrity and build something great for the internet, while also pleasing investors if it's possible?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. I'm not sure if anyone's cracked that, or if they have. They're not coming to mind. I think there are a few obvious things. The easy way for me to think about this problem is, take the WordPress example. What would make that better? What would make that feel better? Not as like messy as it is. And I think there's some really easy answers there. I think Automatic would be in a less tenuous position if the relationships were cleaner. If the WordPress Foundation owned everything to do with the open source community, so WordPress.org, the trademark, all of those assets, including the commercial trademark, by the way. And Automatic had a right to WordPress.com and could run its service and could do all those sides of things. And the two had different leadership teams. So a independent board of directors on each that would be solely focused, not have a conflict of interest, solely focused on what was best for each of those organizations. I think that would be a huge improvement. Without that, maybe it would have been a lot harder to raise venture capital, but I do think there would be a lot more longevity in the goodwill of the community and people's understanding of the model. It's this kind of tangled mess of who owns what and who are they speaking on behalf of that is difficult to reason about.
Yeah, it feels like that. Yeah, that would be maybe something that would be hard to, especially at this stage, to kind of like voluntarily hand over.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like if you spend, I mean, yes, you're right, but Matt spent 20 years saying democratize publishing, get everyone involved. This is open source. It's for the good of the web. If you truly believe all those things, I feel like it should be really easy to hand over power. The question is, does he really believe all those things? That's the thing that's difficult to see at the moment, because there is this kind of tangled web. But I don't know, if you believe those things deeply, I think it is easy. I think it's just a decision. You just make it or you don't make it. Like, I don't own anything to do with Ghost. The foundation owns the trademarks, it owns the domains, it owns the assets, it owns everything. And there's no part of me that wishes like, oh, I wish I'd held on to one of these assets so I could use it as leverage, because that's not what it's for. And I don't know what's in Matt's head, and maybe he has great reasons for why this is the correct way to do it. But I don't know if it's that hard. I think if he wanted to do it, I think he could.
Yeah. Could it also be that there's like, investors, who maybe are not so ingrained, like
not so keen
into the open source project? I don't know. It's
on the Automattic side, I could definitely see that. Then again, he does control the board, so he can kind of do whatever he wants. That's famously. On the foundation side, I feel like there's nothing really preventing him from structuring that more cleanly, having that own the WordPress domain name .org, having a board of trustees or directors that includes community elected positions, which is something you do see in other open source projects, Drupal being like a really good example. I don't think there will be any restrictions on its ability to do that. I think the trademark's probably too messy to totally unpick at the moment. I wouldn't want to try and reason about that one, but there's definitely some things that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah, that makes total sense. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned like Substack, and you mentioned, I think we touched on like Medium, and I actually don't know about Substack. I guess they've raised a lot of money. Yeah. How do you think about, the advantages and disadvantages that you have versus, really well-funded, startups competing with Ghost?
Yeah, that's a great one. There's kind of two categories of advantage and disadvantage. One is the architecture of the code bases, so being centralized versus decentralized. That has some major advantages and disadvantages. And then the other is being funded versus not funded. So on the architecture side, a centralized app you can deploy to production 100 times a day. You've got one database, and the marginal cost of each user is just a row in the database, right? It's very low. It's almost zero. So scaling that, updating it, distributing it, it's all on one domain name. Very easy, relative. Decentralized, you have none of those things. We just on Ghost Pro, we have 26,500 individual databases, which is, it turns out, much harder to scale than, one up until a certain point. Eventually you have to shard it and do all these things anyway. We have 26,500 different domain names we have to support, but more broadly, hundreds of thousands if you include everyone that's not hosting. And so then there's things that you're like, oh, what's the big deal? It's just different domain names. Well, OAuth works based on a callback URL to a particular host name, right? OAuth, the standard, which has become very popular, assumes a centralized architecture. And the way the web has evolved in terms of APIs and webhooks and OAuth has assumed centralization as a given. And when you're building a decentralized app that needs to run on all these domains, all these different servers, all these different instances of the app, what you quickly find is that the building blocks of the web today have not really been optimized for that use case anymore. So almost everything we build is in some way harder because it's distributed. When we want to do an update, we have to ship a GitHub release. People have to go and NPM install that GitHub release. All that has to happen. We don't have access to logs on anyone else's servers to see if there's bugs. Obviously, we do on our own, and we monitor that closely. But all the engineering seems to be a lot more complex for a decentralized app than a centralized app. And then on the funding side, it's really the economies of scale and the things that you can afford to do just by throwing silly venture dollars down the toilet. Substack can have a free plan. They can burn $1 million a month, and the free plan attracts mass attention, right? Is if you have a decent product, good concept, and you can get started for free, lots and lots and lots of people are gonna come in the door. And so you can afford to lose money until you get kind of popular enough that some of those people will upgrade to a paying plan, or you kind of hit this cultural moment where enough you become a brand that everyone knows about, and then you flip that into a business somehow. That's pretty much the Facebook play to some extent. We can't afford to do that. We don't have millions of dollars we can burn through every month. So we can't have a free plan. We can't pay a bunch of people to use Ghost, which is another thing Substack do, is they just offer these giant checks. So you see they announce like celebrity so-and-so is on Substack now, and you think, wow, that person has good taste. They're famous. If they're using Substack, this discerning, good decision-making individual must have carefully analyzed which product to use and determined Substack the best. And you say, yeah, it's that, or it's the $300,000 that they got to come over and set up a new site. So they pull different marketing levers, which is definitely an advantage they have that we can't do. Trying to think if there's a good counterexample of an advantage we have. I think so. One of the advantages we have of being decentralized and open source, going the other way, is customization. So any centralized platform, there's a limit to the third-party code you can allow to run, right? Because it's going to impact all other customers. Whereas we can have fully custom themes, integrations, much more deep features and customizations that publishers typically want as they get bigger. Beginners often don't care about those things, but once people start building a serious brand on the internet, they often start caring about those things. And centralized platforms, closed platforms, funded platforms, they tend to have a harder time. Until you get to kind of Shopify scale, where you can do some of those things in a centralized way, that's much more of a challenge for them. So I guess that was a lot. Those are all the things popped into my head.
yeah, that makes sense. It's one stupid question. If you did have loads of millions of dollars in the bank and you could pay one person to use Ghost, who would you want to use Ghost?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I've even... Let me stew on that one, and let me come back to you at the... I'll have that as a background process.
If you suddenly did have like millions of dollars, is there anything that you would do that... I mean, I guess the free plan is one thing, and you had to spend this money.
What will we spend it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably the free plan. But I might do it... I might think of it as more a free plan in the form of funding or helping specific groups of people, rather than just having a broad free plan. There's a lot of places that zoom out a bit. Journalism is like massively struggling. The reason kind of everyone's angry with the media now is because they do clickbait, outrage nonsense that drives everyone insane, right? And the reason they do that is because their business model went away. They used to make billions of dollars. Now they make I think less than 10% of what they did a couple of decades ago. And that's because Google and Facebook took all the advertising dollars. They're more compelling ad platforms. And so what's happened is the lack of the business model has eroded the fabric of journalism as a whole, as a market, as an industry. But when journalism works well, it has a real purpose, and it's not clickbait and outrage. It's serving communities. It's helping people understand what's going on, with their neighbors or their schools or their community, like what's happening that they actually need to know about. Who is going to be elected, not at the national level, but in the direct kind of community you live in. Who's making decisions, and how are they making decisions, and who should we vote for, and like what's going on? There's having more informed groups of people as a society is generally a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's not possible without funding it. And at the moment, that's kind of the biggest thing we're trying to fix with Ghost, with the memberships, with the subscriptions, is to have a business model that's actually sustainable. Your readers pay you. In doing so, you must deliver them high quality content, otherwise they'll cancel. It sets journalism back to the model it used to have with newspapers, which by all accounts seemed to work a lot better than what we have today. So it's a long-winded way of getting back around to your original question, which is, if I had a spare million lying around, I would probably try and incubate and fund more new local news organizations to start up, get off the ground, get sustainable. Because the state we're at now is, while the big media is distracting themselves with outrage, all the local news outlets have been steadily dying for about the last 10 years, to the point where there's large places in the US that are total news deserts, which is to say there isn't a local newspaper. There's simply no one covering that geography at all. The only thing you can do is kind of read the national stuff, but all of the issues that are actually relevant to you, that actually make a difference to your day-to-day life, blackout, no information. So I think that's something long-term we would love to solve. And if you gave me $1 million today, I'd get a head start.
Yeah. This is really cool. And I have to admit, I've been using Ghost, as I said, for like years now. And I didn't really know that much, except for like, it's a great platform for hosting Scaling DevTools blog. So it's been really cool to kind of learn about you. And I think that I'll say one of, in case no one's coming to mind, but that I've spoken to, who has this like purpose, which is, much bigger than yourself. And it's not just about, getting the Lamborghini. It's about, you've got this purpose to make the internet better, make journalism better. So I think it's great. And thank you so much on one user of the internet. Thank you. It's great.
I appreciate that. I also thought of an answer to your previous question, by the way. I think if I could throw money at someone to use Ghost, it would be Ben Thompson. Ben Thompson's like the granddaddy of this space. He was the original one who got successful with paid subscriptions on a newsletter and sort of proved that this business model can work. So he's like I say he's like Paul Graham is to Y Combinator. Ben Thompson is to kind of subscription-based media on the internet. The problem is, I don't think there's any price that you could buy Ben Thompson's favor with. He does very well from his publication, which is called Stratechery, to the extent that I don't think he has a price.
Yeah, you'd need a lot of venture dollars, and they'd be like, "Why are you spending it all on this one guy?"
Yeah, and why is he getting more than Joe Rogan got from Spotify? Explain.
Yeah. Okay, two last questions that I have for you, John. One is, if you had one piece of advice for someone getting started, what would it be?
I think it's almost cliched at this point, but just ship earlier than you think you should. Cut your feature set in half, get out the door. Peter Level says all these things. He's much better at being an evangelist for these types of things than me, but just do things. And they don't have to be big. Do them small. Ghost started as a blog post. I didn't set out to build a product and a company. I set out to get a blog post idea, just an idea out of my head in the form of a blog post. And I didn't really think anyone would be very interested. But with hindsight, that was the MVP of the product. The MVP of the product was marketing the idea and seeing if anyone cared. Because if no one had cared, if that blog post got 10 page views and went silent, it would not have been a good thing to invest 2 years of my time into building and getting going with Hannah. But because there was that immediate demand, it gave me so much signal of, all right, this is worth it. Like, this is worth investing time in. It took away that uncertainty. And so whatever idea you have, if you're trying to start a project, I think just keep constantly trying to find the smallest version of it and ship that. And the smallest version of it could be a tweet. It could be, here's my idea. Does anyone think this is a good idea? And then iterate up. But the 0 to 1 hurdle of, what I need to announce something, but I want people to like it. I don't want them to hate it. Almost everyone gets stuck there. And so just relentlessly tell yourself, I need to get something out the door, I think is the most useful thing you can do.
That's great advice. And if anyone is interested in John's early story, I think they should check out Indie Hacker's interview Cortland did a great interview with you in 2017. It's really good. My final question is: are there any dev tools that you're really excited about right now?
I mean, all the AI coding assistants like everyone else. Doesn't really matter which one. I've been doing Cursor and Claude, it's not a very interesting answer probably to most people, but I think so. I'm more of a designer and a front end developer for the most part. Hannah, my co-founder, is really the brains of the operation when it comes to Ghost, and particularly when we were getting off the ground. But the most interesting thing I think with AI coding, whatever the tool, and so maybe this is more targeted at the front end developers of your audience, is the AI makes a person who knows a little bit much smarter, and it makes a person who knows a lot doesn't really help much. So I can now code side projects myself that are full stack applications that work. That is not something I could do before. And that excites me no end. I can sit down with, a chat box and a code editor, and I can ship an end-to-end working app with my design and front end skills augmented by a functional API backend database and a deploy pipeline. And the sphere of what I'm able to do has grown so dramatically that I'm still I've been excited by this for about a year, and it's not abating. That's kind of my thing that's still there at the moment. But I know great developers say, yeah, the answers are shit. But if you don't know how to do any of that stuff and it lets you do some of it, the answers are pretty great. And again, like if I could get any of my projects to the point where people actually care about them, well, at that point, then I'll hire a great developer to come and fix all of AI's bullshit. So
Yeah.
that problem solves itself.
Yeah, it aligns really well with your previous point about shipping fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you coming on. And everyone should check out Ghost if they're thinking of a blogging platform. It's great. You can check out Scaling DevTools blog and see what it's like.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks, John.